On September 14, 2024, a shocking story that makes one rethink the credibility of the people we call family occurred in the community of Ikpugo, and this story started on that fateful day when Mary Nwadu went to visit one of her kinsmen but never returned. On Saturday, September 14, 2024, somewhere in Ikpugo community, Nkana West local government, Enugu State. It was the weekend and Mary Nwadu, an elderly woman who was about 70 years of age at the time, felt bored at home and needed someone to chat with, so she went visiting. After all, she was an elderly woman whose children were all grown up and no longer around her. She chose the home of an extended family member, not far from her own home, and went on her way. It was said that Mary left home at around 8 a.m. on her visit to the home of Mrs. Okoye, her close relative, but on getting there Mary didn't meet Mrs. Okoye, as she wasn't at home at the time of her visit, but strangely, Mary never returned home either. At first, everyone thought she went in search of another gist partner. After all, what the elderly loved was having someone to chat with. However, Mary did not return even at noon that day, an action which was very unusual of her. The Mary everyone knew would go out for a while but would soon return home, but on this fateful day, Mary was nowhere to be found. Her children were informed and they became particularly worried about the whereabouts of their 70-year-old mother. They all rushed back home, assembling themselves in their mother's living room, but decided to wait a little while for her to return, as some never believed that their mother could truly go missing. After all, she was an old woman who lived amongst her people and didn't have the strength to go far. But despite their unbelief, they never heard from her, and that was when fear took place in their hearts and they took steps to visit all her friends and those who knew of her whereabouts and usual chatting spots, including the home of Mrs. Okoye. On getting to the house of Mrs. Okoye, the family member of Mary Nwadu, who was also her favorite gist partner, they met her son, Ikechukwu Okoye, who told them that their mother had been there earlier that morning but also left shortly after she arrived, as she did not meet his mother, who she had come in search of. The children of Mary Nwadu returned home in despair after searching for her around the entire community and all the places she frequented. They decided to wait for the return of their mother instead, but a whole day passed and there was still no news from Mary. Despite having gone visiting in that same community, it was as if she had disappeared into thin air. Early the next morning, 15th of September, 2024. The children of Mary Nwadu hurried to file a missing person report for their mother at the nearest police station to their home. The police began investigations almost immediately, but after days and weeks of hard work, Mary was still not found. Investigations proved abortive. No one seemed to have seen or heard from Mary since that day, and no one could pinpoint exactly where they had last seen her, making all efforts of the Enugu State Anti-Kidnapping Squad abortive, and the children, who received no news, neither from the police nor their missing mother, more devastated. Suddenly, in the early hours of Saturday, 5th of October, exactly 3 weeks after Mary Nwadu went missing and when her children had begun to assume her dead, they received a call from an unknown number and an unknown person, informing them that their mother was being held captive by them and they needed to pay a ransom of 6 million naira for her release. The already devastated children first felt relieved to hear news about their mother and her safety, but soon became agitated when they heard the amount of money the ransom was worth. They quickly began to haggle prices with the kidnapper to reduce the exorbitant price of 6 million naira, which they certainly could not afford. Whether it was out of mercy or impatience, we might never know. Still, the kidnapper finally agreed to their plea and settled for a ransom fee of 3 million naira after much haggling, but would not let them speak to their mother nor hear her voice despite asking them to pay for her release. But of course, the worried children would never agree to this condition, not after worrying and having sleepless nights over their missing mother for weeks. How can they just send money without being sure that their mother was hale and hearty? They strongly requested that they speak to their mother at all costs before the ransom was paid, and the kidnapper after much struggle agreed, but in turn told them they would have to pay a fee of 20,000 naira before he could let them hear her voice at all. The money was paid quickly as the children were pretty anxious to confirm the safety of their beloved mother, but the anticipated voice of their mother was never heard. They couldn't reach the kidnapper anymore. It was as if the very same kidnapper who had asked for an exorbitant ransom and had threatened them with their mother's life if they didn't pay as soon as possible, didn't want the money anymore. It was however at this time that they remembered that they had not reported the current development to the police. When they did, the anti-kidnapping police squad quickly made a move. After all, it was the first lead in weeks of searching for Mary Nwatu. With the help of the intelligence unit, the kidnapper was nabbed, and as shocking as it may be, it was the very family member Mary had gone to visit, the very one no one suspected. The son of Mrs. Okoye, Ikechukwu Okoye, but Ikechukwu was not the only one in on this act. After all, he needed an accomplice, one who would support and keep his activities a secret, and this accomplice was none other than his lover, Juliet Agbodo. The very right support he needed to put this kidnap action in motion. The two were discovered and arrested, but Mary was still not found. Under the pressure of the angry children of Mary Nwatu, the suspects Ikechukwu and Juliet were questioned repeatedly, and their resulting confession was one shocking to the ear of all that heard of it. Apparently, Ikechukwu had seized, kidnapped, and murdered Mary Nwatu already. The children who were so sure, they had heard a female voice, which they assumed was their mother, in the background of the call when he had asked for a ransom, refused to believe this news, and the police had no choice but to make Ikechukwu lead them to the place where he had buried Mary Nwatu. Mary Nwatu was killed by Ikechukwu and was buried in an uncompleted building in that very same compound where she had gone to chat with his mother. The police found the dead body of the poor old woman in a shallow grave. The shocking part of this story, however, was that Mary was killed the very first day her children came to the Okoye's house in search of her, and even before Ikechukwu called Mary Nwatu's children requesting for ransom, Mary Nwatu was already dead. To be precise, Mary Nwatu had been murdered and buried in that shallow grave by him 3 weeks ago, when the search for her had not even officially begun. Why Ikechukwu murdered a 70-year-old woman, who had come to see his mother, and buried her in a shallow grave, is a question that is still left unanswered to this day, and one I am particularly curious about. Mary Nwatu was killed on the 14th of September, 2024, and the ransom requested from her children was just a plan put together by Ikechukwu as a way to fork money out of her children. Ikechukwu Okoye and his girlfriend, Juliet Agbodo, panicked and got scared when the children insisted on hearing their mother's voice before paying the ransom, and decided to settle for the merger amount of 20,000 naira they had gotten from the children, thus making them no longer willing to continue the kidnap trick before they were arrested by the police. As of today, Ikechukwu Okoye, Juliet Agbodo, and everyone involved in the kidnap and murder of Mary Nwatu have been arraigned in the court of law and awaiting trial. As for Mary Nwatu, her body has been exhumed from the shallow grave from which she was unjustly buried and has been sent to the forensics for examination, while her grieving children await the release of her body for burial and justice for their mother.